Good. Hello and welcome to another one of our wonderful events. My name is Ben from our bookshop in Tring, and we're here with the wonderful Jamie O'Connell and Harriet Queralt is kindly doing the interview, and a wonderful little audience as well watching. My notes to the audience: please get your questions in ready for the second half of the show using the Q&A function. So I will send you a little nudge to remind you to get involved. Really, that's your job, frankly. So thank you once again, and without further ado, I will leave you in the capable hands of Harriet Queralt.
Oh, thanks, Ben, and welcome, Jamie. It's really good to have you here, and congratulations on the publication of your debut novel. So this is Diving for Pearls, and it's got some great reviews already. John Boyne, who I love, has said on the cover, a hugely engaging novel from a talented new writer, and loads and loads of really positive reviews. So congratulations. And how's the launch gone?
It was great. As I was saying there, yesterday was a kind of full day. So the day started off in Ireland with a kind of the radio interview, and which went great. And it was kind of as I was saying, the big thing. And once that was done, I was kind of like, whew. So I was on RT, which was kind of the BBC of Ireland's radio. So it was kind of the biggie, and I was the publicist was prepping me all week, but it went great. And then after that, just to go out to the bookshops and see it displayed in shops. I worked in publishing for a number of years, so I've often been the person with the author leading them around the shops, and so to be the author and then just see the book in the window was amazing. And in one of the city centre shops, Hodges Figgis, which is, we walked in, myself and the publicist, and the guy who was doing the windows was literally just holding the poster of the book. And I turned to the publicist like, you definitely texted him 5 minutes ago. That's too good to be true. So it was lovely. It was a real thrill. And then there was a launch event last night as part of one of the book festivals in Ireland. So that was lovely as well. And would you believe afterwards, it's the theme we'll actually talk about when we're talking about the book is I'm of this generation of Ireland who kind of graduated shortly before or around the time of the crash. Which was a huge influence on writing this book. But one of the impacts of that is that a huge portion of my friends are sort of around Europe, essentially. And the positive about the pandemic was it was an online event, and friends who never would have been able to go to any launch were able to attend. So it was a lovely way to then kind of round up the day. And then I fell asleep and slept 12 hours. I was shattered. So.
No, it's brilliant to see, what good reviews it's got.
Thank you.
Now, as it's only just been released, I think maybe a lot of people watching may not have read it yet. So can you give us a kind of brief summary of the book without giving too much away?
So the book was inspired by, it's a book about a city, I suppose. And for me, the first time I visited Dubai in 2012, in 2010, I come from the countryside in Ireland. It's the land of little bungalows and green fields, and to travel to Dubai, and the plane just kind of flew in over the azure blue sparkling sea of the Persian Gulf, and then around over the desert, and then it curls around back in, and then this city just appears out of the desert. And it's all 70 and 80 story buildings. It's a high built city, and it kind of just immediately I was like, this is an interesting thing. I don't know this. It's very different from what I knew. So I know that kind of writer thing started immediately going in my head. And then, funny enough, it kind of reminds me of the Emerald City when Dorothy sees the Emerald City, the sparkling little jewel that's just sitting there. Yeah. And that actually quite inspired the prologue, that moment of when Dorothy first sees the Emerald City. But when I got there and I could see things that, this inequality that exists there, it took me a long time to kind of figure out a plot for the book. And what ultimately was a big influence was a book, Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. I don't know if that's a book you've read, but it's a book that's about New York City in the 70s, but it takes place at just a kind of a key moment in that city's history. And for me, New York in the 70s it's quite rough, but at the same time, there's Halston and there's Studio 54. And so it's a city that's not one city, it's like a city that's 5 cities all matched together. And the way he was kind of able to create this kind of portrait of a city that felt very complete and very alive was he picked different viewpoints. So some of the city was about the viewpoint in the Bronx, and then you had the lady in the Upper East Side. Sort of a series of people scattered across New York in the 70s who gradually all intersected, and the story all kind of came together. So you may be seeing comparison similarities. And then, you know, that was how he created this vision of a very exciting city at a very exciting point in time. And for me, 2000, and it actually takes place in November 2010. You know, it's a specific date when a certain film star came to Dubai, and actually did come to Dubai, and I used that as the inspiration for the week. Who climbed the Burj Khalifa that week? So he climbed this tallest building in the world, which I think is about 800 meters. It's ridiculously high. So it's 4/5 of a kilometer up. It's insane. So I use that to kind of give hopefully a bit of cinema, kind of that quality of a film, you know. And what also happened on that week, which was really key to Ireland and the Irish story, was the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, came to Ireland that week, which was the absolute lowest moment of the recession in Ireland, because essentially Irish government lost control of our finances, and a non-state body just came in and took over the country and slashed everything and you know, took over. So so then there was these two things, and that's how the connection between Ireland was. Ireland was so down on its luck, and then we had Dubai, this kind of glittering jewel in the desert. And I had a number of friends, and that's why I was visiting. I had friends who got opportunity there. I think we're very quick to think that Dubai is the Instagram pictures. But most people I knew who went to Dubai went there because they had no opportunity elsewhere. It wasn't like, I'm going to Dubai to like be all flash. Now, they soon adapt to the flash, but the motivation for going there actually was much more real and much more human. And that's something I really wanted to capture in the book, because I certainly don't want to ever appear in this book that I'm finger wagging about them over there doing that. I want to talk just about the human condition and how corruptible we all are to luxury. Actually, I think I found it myself there, that you very quickly, I'm talking a lot, sorry, you probably have questions, I'm just free associating here, sorry. So I have this anecdote which happened to me when I was there, which kind of explains how I saw how we are as humans. And that is, on my first or second trip to Dubai, I stayed in one of my friend's villas. Drop the bag upstairs, the suitcase, you know, we had your 8 or 9 hour flight, come down, sit on the couch, chatting to my friends, and then eventually went back upstairs to bed a couple of hours later. But when I went back to the room, my case had been unpacked, my clothes had been ironed, and they were all sort of hung up in the wardrobe. And I don't mean like iron the way I iron something, which is, you know, a quick rub and hope for the best, because I just can't stand it. I'm talking ironed how you get them in a shop, or, you know, back from the dry cleaners. Which I still don't know how they do it. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But as an Irish person, and the history of, I suppose, of Ireland going back to immigration, back up 200 years, and going to places like America, and, you know, signs, you know, no blacks, no Irish, literally being on door. I just felt, coming from that history of my country, I was like, I don't know if I feel entirely comfortable about this. And it did leave that reaction. However, 2 weeks later, when I went home with my suitcase and my clothes were opened up, of course, they're all filthy because I'd been wearing them for 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, oh God, I love the maid. And I was like, how quickly in 2 weeks that my mind was twisted. So, and I think that's what's kind of happened with Trevor, who's going there. One of the main characters, the Irish characters in the book, is going there as a newbie. So he's seeing, I'm hoping people who read it really are seeing Trevor's fresh eyes on the city. And then you Siobhan, who's been there a while, his sister, who is fully adapted to life as a Jamira Jane.
I really saw that. There's such a contrast between them. And actually, it's interesting you say about how you open the novel with this very famous film star. I hadn't realised that's because he actually had been there that week, and that was the same week as the event in Ireland as well. So I hadn't kind of realised that connection. It's brilliant actually, because that, you know, the Burj Khalifa as a symbol of, you know, the heights that Dubai has risen to, and then contrasting with what was happening in Ireland at the same time.
There was one other funny little synchronicity moment. It certainly wasn't any of my doing, but it just happened to be the case. Was the book opens also up with Terminal 2 in Dublin Airport messing up one of the characters' flights.
Yeah.
Terminal 2 was actually opening up that week, and that was when the first direct flights went from Dubai to Dublin, which was just also another random coincidence that happened. So this week in late November, for some reason, there was just this weird sync, and it just gradually revealed itself.
Yeah.
There is actually one other thing. Actually, you might be interested in this because it's about London. So, so when I was thinking up the story, and as I said, it sounds like a lot of thought was going on, but this took place over a couple of years of visits of trying to. It was almost like I was trying to find my way into something for a long time, and all these ideas were coming up. But a big click for me as well was when I realized Dubai and Victorian London had a lot in common. Not the London of today, literally Victorian London. And that was the kind of class system there, the haves and the have-nots. The way in Victorian London, you have an outward morality, and then there was all this sort of seedy kind of underbelly to the city that was going on. Dubai is exactly the same as that. And what was the other thing? There's three kind of ways. But what it clicked in my head was Charles Dickens and his writing about London. And I did think about how he constructed novels about a city. Yeah. And it was actually our mutual friend that opens up with a body found dead in the Thames.
Yeah.
And actually that's why there's a body opening up in Dubai. in Dubai, the opening, the thing that I come from short stories, so I found plotting a novel the most challenging part of this process. Yeah. And I was like, what will drive this book? I have my characters, I have my themes, I have everything, but it needs a spine. Like, it needs something that the dominoes are falling and a reader wants to know what's going to happen. There's no book if there's no story. Otherwise it's just me ranting about luxury and you know. So, but actually that realization of the body being found in Dubai, which I can thank Charles Dickens for that, was inspired by that, and then out of that the plot kind of.
We're not really spoiling the story because you know, after the famous film star, who I did recognise by his description of his smile, very, I was like, yep, I know who that is. And then obviously the first event really is this body being found, so we're not spoiling anything. But what then you do is you've got these kind of 6 main characters, haven't you? Yeah. And it's all about the way that they're kind of linked in with this. And you know, I just thought they were so carefully chosen to show the different sort of strata really of Dubai. So you've got Asim, haven't you, the Emirati character, Tahir, the Pakistani taxi driver. We've got the Ethiopian maid, the Russian sex worker, the Irish expats, and then you've got Trevor, the visitor. And I suppose in a way, he's kind of the main character. Like you said, you're seeing it through his eyes, aren't you? I think for people that haven't been there, you know, it's really interesting to kind of, you know, to see it through his eyes. Yeah. But I just thought it was great the way that you had those sort of 6 different perspectives. Was it very difficult to write from those different perspectives, or was it that was what was holding your novel together? That was the structure in a way.
Before a novel writing, I would have written short stories, and the way I would generally write a short story is I'm trying to find a character's voice. And once I have their voice, I'm kind of teasing it out for a while. And usually what I'm trying to find out is, what is their Achilles heel? Like, what is the thing that if I push this button, this person is really going to unravel? Because I think if you want a compelling story, you have to be touching on their kind of deepest fear, you know. So that heavily informed, I think, how I wrote the story here. And I've succeeded in what I set out to do if I have made you fall in love with my cast of characters, and then they go through hell and you go through hell and back with them because you care about what's happened to them. You know, if you purely read the book on that level, I hope you enjoy it. I really do, you know, and whatever about all the other themes that are going on, you know, for me, character is everything with story. And I've realized as books that if I don't love the character, I'm like, if they were hit by a bus right now, I wouldn't. And this book ended 80 pages early, you know, that kind of feeling. I have to love the characters. So
they're great characters. There's one character that I think we're not supposed to like. But
he's awful.
but apart from him, and even, you know, Siobhan, you know, Trevor's sister, she's got her flaws, hasn't she? But she's lovable and
Yeah.
relatable, and no, I think they're great characters. Yeah, I was
Well,
going to
Siobhan,
go on, carry on.
oh, no, sorry. Well, Siobhan for me is an interesting, because I don't think she knows herself. On the one hand, she's like a moth to the flame with the glitz and the glam, and she does, love all that. Is shaken from the Irish financial issues, so she still finds it hard, the idea of spending so much on a watch or a purse. It still kind of is a wound that's there for her.
But then she
for
does.
me, but I think she's unhappy, actually. I think ultimately Siobhan is very upset at the way things were ended with her dad before he died. She's on the phone to her mother all the time. She's hugely protective of her brother and always has been. And she loves her children. And actually, that is her deepest fear. And when I was developing her character, she was the hardest one to kind of go, because her life was kind of nice. So it was like, how do I make her compelling? And actually, I was like, oh, her children. That's when the tigress is going to come out. That's when she's really going to kind of come to life. And actually, her personality type, if she knew herself, wants to be with her family. She's too involved in them all. Like, no amount of money makes it okay to be away from the people you really care about. I think I don't, that's my personal feeling on it. And I understand at the time it's financial necessity. They have no chance of jobs or a future really back in Ireland. But it's a huge price to pay. I think that's something, and as I said already, as someone whose friends are now scattered around Europe and may remain that way because they've now set up their lives in different countries, rather, and may never come home, I still really feel the weight of 2008 when this all went wrong. And I feel my generation may forever now be different in the way we live because of that. So, and for me, Siobhan, you could read her too light as well. Actually, I think there's more going on. I kind of, the more I'm like, family is everything. But
and she loves having Trevor over there, doesn't she? I mean, which of those characters, did you sort of identify with a particular character, or is there a bit of you in all of them? Or
it's because I mean, there's always, I was very cautious of writing about other culture, people with other cultural backgrounds and things like that. I think especially, it's something that I certainly don't want to in any way give the intention that I'm speaking for another culture, or these are individuals that came out of my individual experience there of talking to maids and talking to taxi drivers and just hearing their stories. But what kind of came out of it all was, we're all the same. We just want to feel safe. We want to do well for ourselves. We want to feel loved, and and we want to care for our families. And I thought all of them, every single character there has that underneath all the labels and everything else that's going on. But that is the root of everything, and for me, I suppose of any of them, I found probably Gita I kind of related to, because I was always very ambitious as a young person. I feel she has ambition, like she wants to do something with her life, and she's, because of her life, it's going to be, it's a tough road. She's not got it easy, but I feel her as a teenager and that writing sort of flashbacks where I could kind of, I actually found that ambition something that maybe I was drawing for myself writing it, I don't know, but there definitely was that. I wanted to try and, well, I loved writing, and I was, I wanted to be a writer at 15 as well. So maybe it's that, but I suppose I liked her as well. I thought she was,
No, I think they're all very likable characters, and like you said, you really get involved in their story and fear for them, and it's quite a tense read, really. What's going to happen, but I don't know, we won't spoil the ending, but it works out better for some than others, doesn't it? But
I found it quite a hard one to end, because I'd created a world that was quite almost like let the great world spin, that was quite chaotic, and there's all the stuff that's going on, and it doesn't always end well. And I feel like when you write a story, you set a worldview of what kind of world, even though it appears like reality, it is actually a constructed reality with certain rules. And to have finished with a really neat bow would have sort of compromised the reality I'd created. And it would have been the same as if one of them suddenly could fly. You'd be like, this is not, I've broken the rules of my own world. And so it's, it works out better for some than others. And I wanted the book to feel like I wanted to feel like a wheel. You got to the end and it's like, funny, there was a review out today and it said it had the feeling of a snake eating its own tail. And I thought it was the loveliest thing. I was like, that's exactly the feeling of like,
yeah,
it repeats. We're in this loop that's repeating.
Definitely. I really like the way that the ending kind of comes back to the beginning, and yeah, I think that's really clever. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the short story writing, actually, because I haven't read any of your short stories. I will now. But was it quite daunting writing a novel after writing short stories, or is short story writing just the way to prepare for writing a novel? And I mean, in a way, the fact that you told these stories of the different characters and you've got them linking together, was it daunting? Or I mean,
it was. I tried novels before this one that hadn't worked. I've wanted to be a writer since a young age, since about 11. I've actually kept everything since then. I think there must be 800,000 words, 1 million words, like written from teenage years and all along the way. So I had a lot of failed writing. So I have to say there was a nervousness about trying a novel because I actually think it's a very different skill set. And often even when you talk to novelists and then you talk to short story writers and then you talk to poets and you realize they have such different relationships with language. One is focused on a macro scale. The short story writer is puzzling over every sentence and word, and then poets see language in a totally different, almost like the words are creatures, kind of in a totally different way again. So I would say there was challenges. The type of structure of a book I did kind of helped with that, because the book only takes place over a week, that kind of short window of time, which is very short story, so it allowed me to kind of control that. And I suppose that the story is stretched out using kind of flashback, which is also would be quite short story-ish, and it allowed me to be very intense. It's short bursts of intense time with each person, which is also a very short story. But the bit that I found hard, which is what I've already said, that was finding the backbone, the narrative. And I have to say thank you, Charles Dickens, for the girl dying. And what I found about my own practice with writing is I can't know everything starting out, because if I do, then I don't want to write it. I need to have that thing where I'm writing and the character does something and I'm like really surprised that they've just done that. And I'm like, but that just came out of my own head. How am I surprised by character do that? So that really excites me and that keeps me really interested. But at the same time, you can't do that fully with a novel, kind of let the pen go for a walk, or else you end up with 1 million words sitting in drawers, like as I have from.
But it is very structured. I do think the structure is very strong and very kind of evident. But I mean, did your experience of working in publishing help in the writing, help in getting it published?
It helped with my sanity as a writer, actually, more than anything else. Where I realized how, because I've said in numerous publishing meetings where manuscripts are discussed, and firstly, as before I'd say anything, I don't think I've ever met someone working in publishing who I don't think is very sincerely interested in books and whose eyes don't light up when a great manuscript lands on a desk. And it's lovely, that feeling where everyone in the room goes, this is special, But I suppose at the same time, I really understood publishing is where art meets business. And there's a tension there. There really is a tension there. And sometimes a spreadsheet wins out, and unfortunately, and if I don't know if there's any sort of writers out there who are considering, what they're writing, get very clear on who your comps are. And by comps, I mean the authors who you would fit in that genre. And you're not saying, I'm not saying like, I think I'm Margaret Atwood, nothing like that. But you're kind of going, well, I'm kind of inspired by her, and I think that's the space I'm in. Or in my case, John Boyne being on the cover of my book, I'm like, I kind of feel a bit John Boyne-y, in terms of.
I thought that, like, one of my favorite books is Heart's Invisible Furies. And
it's one of my favorite books. It's brilliant.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I hate saying that because I've just said I'm a little bit John Boyne, and then I'm like, it's one of my favorite. But like, I don't mean to be. But because I hadn't seen he'd said that on the front, and when I'd finished reading it, I was just sort of thinking a bit of, I don't know, when I sort of found out you were Irish, I was like, John, Irish writers, John Boyne. So I think it's amazing that he's, he likes it. I was delighted. And in terms of the publishing side of it, if you get clear on your comps, because, for example, I was talking to an editor once, and she was saying it wouldn't matter how good your book was, but if you're in Ireland and you write a piece of historical fiction set in 12th century Connacht, you will not sell it, even if it's could win the Booker Prize. It's so good, because no publisher will be able to look at sales history and go, a book from that genre made any money. Like a publisher has to make financial sense. So even when I teach creative writing, and it's good to have some sense of where the market is, and we even saw in the last couple of years where Northern Ireland books based around Northern Ireland really struggled in the UK. And then Milkman came along and obviously won the Booker Prize, and it was huge, like absolutely huge. The next year, there was about 5 Northern Ireland novels commissioned by UK publishers, when the year before you would not have been able to get one published. And Sally Rooney has obviously been huge as well. And there's now, it's developed into a whole trend of sort of young female voices, which is fantastic and long overdue. But to know those kind of things is definitely helpful, so that even with knowing where a book goes in a shop, there's a brilliant book written a few years ago in Ireland, and she's now written a book since that was a bestseller. But this book she wrote was part essays, but with recipes as well. It was kind of how her recipes helped her overcome a nervous breakdown, and kind of cooking. And it was an unusual mix. But the problem was it cookery or was it memoir? And I spoke to a lot of shop assistants, and they're like, we actually don't know what shelf to put this book on. And that might sound something small, but it actually massively affected the potential of that book. So this kind of knowledge is good to know, because it shows the business of it. And also, when your manuscript and you haven't heard anything back for 3 months, or you've got 5 rejections or whatever it is, it's not personal. You're sitting there and going, they hate me, they hate my writing, I'm useless. And the narrative goes, I think writers are naturally catastrophizing, and that's where the stories come from. But actually, I really came away from my years in publishing going, it is not personal.
Yeah,
it is not personal at all.
That's really interesting. And did that kind of encourage you to put the sort of worlds of Dubai and Ireland together? I mean, there's such a long history, isn't there, of great Irish writers, and there does seem to be a real appetite for that as well. Did that encourage you to put the Irish bit in, or was it always the kind of parallels of Dubai and Ireland?
I think, as I said, there's that mix of trying to figure it out, but then also allowing a certain amount of magic to happen as well, So I suppose for me, the Dubai even being written at all was purely based on the experience of arriving there, and then actually going online and trying to find a book of fiction written about Dubai, and there really is minimal. It's very, very minimal.
Yeah.
And there was one book out, The Dog, I think Joseph O'Neill, he wrote Neverland a few years ago, but it was a very different kind of book to my book. But that was kind of it. And it took my agent a bit of time. She was like, I love the book. And there was days when I was like, is it actually any good? Like, I'm actually a good writer. Are you just being nice to me? And she was like, this is a great book. It will find a home. But she said, look, it just has to be the right time. The timing will line up on this. And I think part of that now, as I said, working in publishing, was a question that would come up in a meeting when a manuscript about to buy would come in and go, what has been successful in that space? What has, what can we compare it to? And I'd imagine there wasn't much to compare it to. So it was a bit of a,
well, Dubai is relatively new, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's not a genre that hugely exists, and I'd imagine it takes an editor of some courage to throw the dice a bit on writing on a subject when there's no sort of track record that they can kind of argue on. So I'm very grateful to my editor.
Yeah. Sorry? And maybe having the island comparison in there kind of gives it that. I think it does, doesn't it? It just gives it a certain sort of depth. But then I think the fact as well that you've looked at all the different kind of strata of society, is so good. And it's,
thank you.
It's Dubai, isn't it? Anyone that's visited, like I have, it really does kind of sum it up.
Thank you.
So
thank you very much.
Really good. I did think it was really interesting the way that you showed those different kind of strata, but you're not kind of critical as some people might be. You know, you sort of very much let the characters speak for themselves. Did you, you know, I mean, I suppose you talked a bit, didn't you, about your experience about the maid unpacking your clothes and that kind of thing. You know, are you sort of, do you think it would be popular in Dubai? Does Dubai have a lot of bookshops?
I don't think, from my experience of being there, it doesn't have a lot from what I could see. I think just my personal philosophy on life is I love that quote by what's his name? It's going to escape me now, but he's the Roman playwright, and he said, "I'm a human being. Nothing human is alien to me." So, like, we're all equal, and we're all capable of actually, the quote at the start of the book, where I have that Proust quote, and it's that tension between empathy and indifference. And, you know, he kind of says that basically the most pervasive evil in the world is indifference. And I think we are all, every day of our lives, choosing every moment, or like if you walk up the street and you pass someone who's, you know, homeless on the street, and like you have to choose empathy or indifference in that moment. And of course you can't choose empathy, like you drive yourself to do, but it's just to be aware. And in Dubai, the likes of Siobhan and that has to kind of be a bit indifferent. You know, I think if you sit down and thought about it for too long and thought about the empathy, you'd probably not be able to live there very long. It would start to wear you down pretty fast. But I think that's in all of us, and I think we all make that choice all the time. I was working in Dublin last summer, and like homelessness in Ireland's become a massive issue actually since the Celtic Tiger crash, and there's a huge housing crisis, and it's all going on. And when I worked in the city centre, it was a common occurrence to walk back. You know, I'd get the bus into town and walk to the office, and I'd always pass homeless people, and I thought, this is how Irish society is treating its most vulnerable people. So I don't think we have any soapbox to stand on how Dubai is treating their vulnerable people if we're happy for people to be in sleeping bags in a doorway. It's not, how is that any better? You know, so, and because you actually talk about that Dubai Ireland tension, I try to make sure that anything I sort of showed about Dubai that maybe wasn't great had an Irish equivalent. So there's a scene, and maybe people didn't pick up on it, where Joan goes to Russborough House, which is a kind of a beautiful, stately home, which was, a beautiful stately home in the countryside, which was an Irish, very wealthy couple owned. They were heavily involved in diamonds in the 1940s, and they hung out with the Mitfords and all these kind of people. But they were very happy to live in absolute luxury, where like the house is full of treasures from Marie Antoinette's magnifying glass. Like, we're talking insane luxury, and up the road Ireland is in poverty. So for me, that was very important to have that in there. Just maybe people didn't pick on that because it's actually a date, so you can just read it as two people out on a date. You don't even have to read it. But I picked that because I wanted that feeling of, well, we're well able, if we have a few quid here in Ireland, we're well able to, you know, sign up to a bit of luxury.
That's very, very true. I hadn't kind of made that connection, but I can definitely see that now. I think also setting it in 2010, you know, the whole kind of bust after the boom, you know, it showed that the island had a boom, like, you know, Dubai is having a boom. So no, really interesting parallels. Do you want to read us a little bit, maybe your favorite extract, if you've got it?
Yes, I have like a 2 paragraphs, so don't worry. I know like reading through Zoom can be difficult, so I don't want to bore people, but
give people a taster.
I just have this one. It's 2.5 paragraphs. It will only take about a minute to read, but it's tied into the Dubai brunch, and maybe I'll just set up that first. So, in Dubai, I think you've been to one. You said, Harriet.
Yes.
So
amazing and kind of, you know, abhorrent at the same time. You know,
so
amazing.
So on a Friday, which is their Saturday, they have the Dubai brunch, and so you dress up and you go into the hotel, and you're kind of there between the hours of maybe like 1:30 and 6 or 7 in the evening. And you pay in, and it's quite expensive. I think it'd be like 800 to 1,000 dirhams, nearly 200, maybe 150 pounds or something like that. It's expensive. But then you go in, and then they have this to call it a buffet isn't even right, but we have these little mini kitchens, certainly the ones I went. So you might have your English dinner kitchen, and you'll have everything from Yorkshire pudding to your side of lamb to your beef to your ham, and every kind of roast potato, mashed potato, like everything. And then you move on to your next kind of stand, and it will be like the cheese stand. And I remember seeing there, they had cheeses that I think in Ireland you can only get from a cottage off the West Coast. I'm like, how do they have this cheese? It's insane. But like a selection of 20, 30 cheeses. And then you go into the next room and it could be Indian or, Thai food and or Italian food. And you just sit there all day eating. And, you have your table, and the brunch I was at, which is awful when you think about it, like these, there's waiters there who are obviously, from, as we see, the kind of migrant workers, I suppose, who are literally just topping up your drinks all day. So you're kind of thinking like, how can I possibly be like seeing double when I've only had half a glass of wine or champagne or whatever you're having? But actually what's happening every time you have 2 mouthfuls, someone comes in and tops it up. So, and you just sit there it's like a Roman feast where I'm literally, as I said to you before we went on the call, where's the vomitorium? It's that kind of gluttonous, and it's nuts. And it was an experience, and I'm glad I did it because I have a chapter in the book about it. But it's extreme. So I'm just going to read the 2 paragraphs where I describe kind of the dessert part of the experience. I hope you've had your dinner because you might be quite hungry after this. Behind the chocolate fountains, Trevor gazes at the rows. Oh, before I start, Rocco is his nephew who's lived in Dubai his whole life. He's only a young child. Sorry, I hate when people do that with novels explaining, but just so you know who Rocco is. Behind the chocolate fountains, Trevor gazes at the rows of mini cakes, 10, 20, 30, easily 50 varieties. Half of these names he couldn't even pronounce. Morsels of flaked chocolate, glazed summer fruits, lemon, strawberry, and chocolate mousses. Blackberry tartlets with a vanilla-flavoured mascarpone cream, flaky and shortbread pastries, fruit tarts, salted caramel, croquant brioche, fresh fruit flutes, eclairs, perfectly rounded macaroons in a rainbow of colours, gold leaf chocolate cakes, gianduja filled fritter rolls with double chocolate sauce and toasted hazelnuts, a crepe stand, chocolate syrup, banana, nuts, sprinkles, marshmallows, honey, summer fruit. Beside it, an ice cream stand, mint, mocha, praline, divine vanilla, choco orange, pistachio, rum and raisin. Trevor's plate remains empty as he looks, unable to move. Where to start? Other diners seem to be having the same trouble. What will I choose, darling? That looks delicious. Oh, I'm such a pig. Rocco has no problem picking out ice cream flavors and crepe toppings. Maybe that's the secret. To be comfortable in Dubai, you have to be born there.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that kind of sums up Dubai. It's interesting, isn't it? But also, the decadence and the
yes.
They just always seem to have to do everything kind of bigger and better, don't they?
Bigger, yeah. Like the biggest fireworks for New Year's, and But something about Dubai, I remember, like the tap will be gilt, a gold gilt tap, but water may not come out of it. That's one thing. There's a touch of that about Dubai. It's a veneer. Everything's very a veneer.
Yeah, interesting. No, that's brilliant. Ben, do we have any questions at all?
Yeah, just coming. Hang on. Yeah, we've got a couple in, so bear with me. Let me just up here. Lovely. A couple of questions. Both from anonymous attendees. So, not a clue. I always like to credit them, and they're hiding away in the ether. What part of the creative process have you found the most enjoyable in this novel?
The brunch actually was great fun to write. I did a bit of sort of Nigella Lawson research to try and get like what's the most tasty food I can think of. But actually, the most enjoyable for me was the dynamic between Siobhan and Trevor. I think I have 3 siblings who I'm really close to, and who I actually have 2 older sisters who fully. Well, actually, I'll tell you, I'm gay, and I grew up. I was in school, and my sisters were above me. I was never bullied because my sisters made sure I wasn't bullied. They terrified people. They were like, and a lot of that dynamic.
Are they quite formidable sisters?
My sister has this look that stops animals. If she just puts it on, she can do this like real like turn, and you're like, Jesus, okay, right, okay. And she is well able. I don't know. It's like the basilisk in Harry Potter. If she turns towards you, you turn to stone. You know. So yeah, I think that was the most enjoyable because I was able to draw on something that's so lovely, really, about my life.
Yeah, no, it's a great relationship. Yeah.
Brilliant. And same questioner, still anonymous, but perhaps giving a clue as to their background. Any tips for upcoming writers or those looking to get published? And how have you found the process of getting published? Was it quite a challenge?
It's all about getting back up. I actually think. I think it's trying, like, even the most successful. Actually, I'll tell you this. So sometimes you see even the most amazing news about a writer, like 4 publishers bidding war, you know, on a book, and it suddenly goes for a few €100,000. That book would have probably gone out to probably 10 to 15 publishers. So that means still 8 publishers rejected the most successful auction of the year. So I think like rejection is part of the successful, as well as, you know, the books that don't ultimately happen. So don't be scared of that. You're doing nothing wrong. Rejection is how it works for everyone. And what I would say is, if you do get feedback, I found myself from doing the masters, and then I did the MFA afterwards. I learned after a while, and I'll give an example of this, where the thing I most resisted that my lecturer was advising me to do was actually the most important thing for me to listen to, and actually was the most transformative of my work. And I'll give an example of this. As I said, a child of the Celtic Tiger, all the novels that I could see written before me and that I studied were always this old Ireland. You know, I mean, I love them. John McGahern is an incredible writer, but it didn't reflect the Ireland I lived in sort of 2005 or 2002. I went to college and it was very affluent, and when students can buy cocktails, there's probably a crash on the way. So so I felt this kind of compelling need in my short stories to capture the reality of Ireland as I knew it. And I did a workshop with Alistair MacLeod. He's a Canadian short story writer who's since deceased. And he did this test on the class, and he just said, what were you doing on this day last year? So I actually do it right now. So we're Friday 4th. I should know it because my book's just out, so I know the date. So what were you doing on July 4th last year? So I'll just, do you guys, either Harriet?
June the 4th. Yeah.
June the 4th. Sorry, June the 4th.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a clue.
So he asked that question, and of course we're all sitting there looking around, and then he goes, exactly. Reality is boring. Don't write about it. And the reason being, and then he went on to talk about it, and that is, I was trying to capture reality as if, and a writer isn't meant to be a photograph. We're not photographers. We're actually meant to be painters. So I would write a scene thinking I want to capture reality in Ireland as it was, but I wouldn't think in terms of like a film director and going, why is it in the morning? Maybe the scene would be better in the evening. Like, why is it in summer? Why, would it be better if I changed it to winter? And the more I realized how artificial writing is, the better my writing became. The more I realized every element of it. If you watch a film and there's a book put on a coffee table, someone put it there. It didn't accidentally land there. It was put there for a reason. So if you think about writing at that level, I improved my writing hugely, but it was the thing I really resisted, because I was like, I must capture the experience of my generation and my youth, and I was very fixated on being truthful to that, and forgetting that ultimately I'm telling a story, and that even as I said, that the world I've created for Dubai is still a created world which had rules as I saw it, and I had to stick to those rules once I created them.
No, interesting. But was there a bit of you in, I don't know, Trevor kind of growing up in Ireland at that time, or Asim is although he's he's a student in Dublin. Like, did you draw on your own experiences for those characters?
Well, Asim, there's a lot of parallels, I suppose, between me and Asim. Of course, he comes from a Muslim culture, and it's a very different thing. But I grew up gay. I also grew up in a very conservative religion. My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses. and the tension between being gay and them being Jehovah's Witnesses. Like, there really isn't a middle ground. There is, you know, there's nowhere to meet. And I would have grown up in the way I feel I seem. Culturally, we might be different, but actually the family dynamic was probably very similar, where you learn there is the truth, which is how you feel, which you learn to not say anymore, and there's the right answer, which they want to hear, you know. And I could feel that dynamic develop through my childhood, and then obviously it progressively became more and more of an issue. So, and it's.
But then a seemed freedom at college in England,
yeah,
compared to, I mean, when he has to go home, and, you know, I was terrified for him, you know, the control his parents had over him.
I think that's maybe where we diverge. Like, when I eventually came out, and you know, Ireland is such a liberal country, I didn't fear, like, I wasn't coming to a country where I'm literally, you know, really criminalized. And though I don't think Dubai, it doesn't seem to be, I haven't heard of much cases in recent years about gay people being particularly persecuted there. Officially, it is illegal, and there's no limit to what the sentence could be. It's literally not written in the statute book, so it's really serious if they decided to go after you for that. So that's where it seems really different to my experience. And definitely when I studied in Dublin, I knew gay Arabs who weren't from Dubai, but from that area, from Kuwait and other places like that, who were studying in RCSI. It's kind of a college that would have a lot of international students. And I think there was this shared experience of, as I said, the tensions within a conservative family and having a gay child, which was very painful for them. But then also, like I had been when I left home and went to a city, got to live in a way that felt like freedom. They got to do that in Dublin. So there was a lot of talk about that, you know. But I did feel my home is still a liberal country, you know, and that there's still their situation is much more challenging than mine in that way.
Yeah.
Nice. There's a good question from Margaret. I'll come back to that in a second. So you're obviously an accomplished short story writer, and so I suspect there are a few attempts that didn't become books that are on your cutting room floor. Is that the case, or was this very much the first book you thought, now this is a novel in this one?
When I was 11, this is how far back it goes, I saw an interview with an author, and I think it was Maeve Binchy on TV, and she talked about writing, and that was the thing that I was like, oh, I think I'd like to try that, because up to that point I was always quite creative, and I loved coloring and painting, and then I saw this interview, and at that time I was 11, and actually Windows 95 had just happened, and my family had got the PC, and it was the dial-up, as we all remember, like the squiggling noises and all the rest of it. But actually it was one of these things that they bought and the family didn't really use except for me, and I would just tap away on there was like a little app called Mavis Speak, and you could learn how to touch type. So I was trying to figure out how to touch type, so I started typing away some words at 11, and I actually got a book down then between that and about 13. I think about 65,000 words or something like that. A mess, but it was down. It was, you know what I mean, like I got it down, and now I couldn't even open the document, it'd be so painful. But and it somehow survived the land of floppy disks and everything to today. But then after that, I started another book, which was kind of a fantasy, which I think I'd read Lord of the Rings just at the time. So it's just a really bad Lord of the Rings, which kind of was my mid-teens. And then I wrote a children's book at 19, which was very Roald Dahl-esque. David Walliams, I don't think was even there at the time. And actually I got an agent at that point. I got signed with Darley Anderson, with an agent there, and she really liked the book, and it got sent out. And actually what happened then was about 7 or 8 publishers came back, said nice things, but ultimately didn't accept it. And the critiques they gave, not one of them matched. It was really like it wasn't like one of them said anything that was clear. And I actually floundered for a while. I didn't know what was the next step, and I tried rewrites and it just wasn't working. And there's those moments in life where you're pushing and you just feel something is pushing back, and every time you try and push harder, the thing pushes back harder, you know, that kind of resistance that's there. And it's always that difference between like a challenge and something that starts to feel like struggle, and you're struggling. And that was when I started thinking about doing the master's in creative writing, and out of that, it's a very long story. I apologize, it's getting longer. I'm realizing. But anyway, I went and did the master's because I felt I didn't know how to write character effectively, and I tried different things in books, and that was how my style of writing now, which is start with character and actually, like an actor, hear them and listen to them, and then like it's almost like hearing their voice, and then let the character tell their story, and you just kind of almost they're transcribing them as they're telling you their story. However, at that time, I went through an awful breakup, my first great relationship, and so I did write a novel then for grown-ups, but it was the great novel that you write after a breakup, which of any of them needs to go in the fire. And certainly I would hope that a good friend, if I ever died, would smash that hard drive before. So and I realize that's a big lesson as well. You need some time beyond certain experiences to really do them justice and to write about them, and even bigger sense of like the novel of the recession of 2010. Like, it's now time to maybe write about that because we have some perspective on it. And as I said, even with the people still living abroad, like that's an interesting angle you wouldn't have if you'd written about it in 2010. I think the pandemic, we need at least 10 to 15 years before we get our great pandemic novel. I think if someone, firstly, who would buy it, because we're like, I never want to think about this again as soon as it's over. I need some serious time to pass, but also we need time to reflect on it, you know, so it's not just in the heat of the moment. But then it was after that novel that I was writing short stories for a few years, and then Dubai kind of came out of that. And Dubai definitely came out of that short story background, different elements we talked about there. Now I'm working on a new novel, and my challenge is
what's next?
So I suppose I'm a good way into it because Dubai actually was finished a few years ago. So I've been editing away with the agent and editor, and I'm starting a new book. So I should have that finished probably in the next 3 months, I'd say. But what I wanted for this was to stick with one character. I definitely wanted to have one character and stay with them for over a long period. So it's a book that covers about 5 decades. So it's kind of, I wanted the challenge of that, which for me feels like a real kind of challenge from my background. And it's about an artist who, well, actually it's a musician who I'm very interested in. I suppose it probably comes from my own experience of how things that happen in childhood and your relationship with your parents can have really long shadows in terms of how you then relate to relationships 40, 20, 30. You know, I love that feeling of, you know, how it affects a whole life. And I'm terrified to say more because I have this awful feeling I'll jinx it, like, because my agent has, like, I have a lot of failed novels, so my agent could read this and go, this is awful. So you'd be asking me again in like next time, how is that novel coming on? I'm going, it's in the file with the other failed work. But,
I doubt it. We promise you'll come back and talk to us about that one.
Thank you. I'd love to. Thank you.
So Margaret has it's probably going to involve probably the rest of the event, which is we've only got 7 minutes left actually. You've brought up the problem of huge wealth versus poverty, and I'm sure many of us have experienced seeing that, you know, the two elements living side by side. It's a subject we often think about. One thing that I've felt is that perhaps we do need people with wealth so that they can sometimes be the conduit for passing on wealth to those who maybe genuinely need it, insofar as sometimes governments maybe don't do that. I mean, I don't know if that's the case. Many wealthy people do take that responsibility. What do you think? And I tell you, I'm going to reference, based on Margaret's question, you know, the Bill Gates Microsoft issue. You know, Bill Gates has clearly just decided to give away a huge amount of wealth over the last few years. But meanwhile, Microsoft, you know, and someone read to me yesterday, they made something like 15 billion pounds profit in the Eurozone or something. And that goes through Ireland. And yeah, I don't think they employ anyone in Ireland. It's a kind of remarkable situation where you have that sort of the juxtaposition between Microsoft and Bill Gates. But anyway, what do you think of that?
I actually think, I hope it's not could be cancelled saying this. I think it's the government's job. People will always avoid paying tax, or like that people will try to. I don't want to pay more tax than I probably have to. And if there's a way to kind of not, I know that sounds, I don't mean like that. What I'm saying is it is the government's job to regulate this, like, and to regulate business, because no one's going to volunteer walking into a tax office and open their wallet and just say, help yourself, so I think there is I understand why Ireland has the tax code that it has, because it really benefits the 5 million people who live there. On an ethical level, I do not agree with it at all. On a person, like, I understand why Ireland does it, because it's serving its best interest, but I think on a wider well-being of these companies are getting the benefits of roads, of the entire infrastructure of a country, and then not paying taxes into that country that just support all that. So I don't ethically agree with that at all. I'd be straight up. But once again, I suppose it's just looking out. Ireland's just looking out for its own interests. It means that head offices are there, and it provides the international companies there provide a lot of employment. And I think Ireland sees them adding value to the country more through employment than through taxes. A huge part of the working population works for pharmaceutical companies or for IT, and I think that's how the government sort of justifies what they're doing. But I mean, everyone should be paying their way, and I don't think there's a problem with it's the hoarding of the wealth. I think some people are great at making money, and I don't wish them ill for that, and that's fine. But and money is just like an energy that needs to be, it's at its best moving around. Do you know what I mean? And doing things, and if everyone's just holding on to it, then it's not healthy. It's I don't know if that would be.
No.
I'm not an economist at all, so I've just said probably a load of things that actually makes no sense. But
no, I mean, it's all very true. I mean, it's one of the criticisms. I mean, say something like the HS2 project, which has got an awful lot of critics. However, it's an investment. It's a project that's moving money around, as you say, which is the sort of probably the main argument for it, frankly. But it's a debate that should be handled on a global level, because I think countries are all competing with each other for institutions to put their money through, isn't it? It's kind of
it's a race to the bottom. It's like, it's a race to the bottom to just get the company to. It's an imbalance of power between the companies and the government. As in the government. That's the way I think there's an imbalance there.
Well, in Dubai, I mean, there's no tax in Dubai at all, is there? Is that right? There's no.
There's no tax. Funny enough, if you were to go to Dubai and you're thinking about like going out there and making some money, because definitely friends of mine have thought, oh, I'll go out there and I'll save my deposit for my house, and it's so hard to get on the property ladder now because all your money is going on rent rather than actually saving a deposit, and then it's this never-ending loop of you can't get out of. And Dubai looks like an option to do that, but the issue is, firstly, you start getting very used to a lifestyle out there, so your savings often don't go the way you think. And actually, even though it's tax-free, if you have children out there, education will cost you an income. It is so expensive to your healthcare and your education there that I think if you want to make Dubai work for you from a financial point of view, go out there as a single person, put the head down for 5 years, don't get too sucked into everything, and just funnel the money back home, and you'll come, and that way you really can make Dubai work for you. And a lot of the migrant workers are actually doing that in their framework of what they're doing. I don't, there's maids out there, and certainly the maids who were staying in the families that I knew were well treated. They had days off. They I suppose we have the Western idea of 9 to 5 and all that kind of, so they followed. But the problem was, if somebody was just a horrible person, there was no law to protect the maid. The maid just had to put up with it. And that bothers me more. The idea of you not having your passport, or so you're powerless, and so they can work you 80 hours a week, and break any sort of sense of decency and human rights. And there's no law there that looks out for the maid. So Dubai works if everyone just is reasonably okay and follows a sort of decent code. But the second something goes wrong, that's when things, and that book is really worst case scenario of things going wrong. Most people go out to Dubai, do that for years, and come home. Like, I haven't written, like, if you read this and think, Dubai, like most 90% of people just go there, do their few years, return home ultimately, because it's not a place you stay forever. As I know there has actually left. But when things go wrong, they tend to go horribly wrong.
Yeah. Listen, we have now clicked through to 8 o'clock. So massive thanks to you, Jimmy, for your time. Harriet, thank you again for your assistance with yet another event. And thank you to the audience who have joined in this evening.
Can I just say thank you to you guys as well for arranging this? I don't know if I did at the start, but thank you, Harriet. That was lovely to chat to you, and Ben, thank you so much.
Great to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Now, next week, I should give a little plug to the things we're doing next week. Tim Marshall, The Power of Geography, is on Tuesday. We've got Victoria Hislop. That's a children's event, actually, so probably you're not the target audience for that. But then we've got our first physical event on Thursday, Stacey Hall's, which again, Harriet is doing the interview for that. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Another great book, Mrs. England. Really enjoyed it.
Mrs. England, yes, absolutely. I think it's going to be it is our book of the month for June. So apologies, Jamie, not choosing it.
It's okay.
Listen, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
And, let's hope we can meet up and do this in some sort of physical form next time. Next week we've got out.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Jamie.